Did Pathfinder 2nd Edition over-nerf casters? And what happened in our Marshals vs. Casters event? I am Ronald, the rules lawyer. I love talking RPGs in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. Like and subscribe to my channel and join my Discord. Throughout the history of Dungeons & Dragons, there has been a persistent nagging problem of how to find more balance between the power of fighters and more martially inclined, more mundane classes, and magical classes like wizards. Some would argue that this is not a problem, but it's undeniable that at some tables, many tables actually, that if a player has a character that is completely outshone or sometimes even made redundant by another character at the table, that they have a less fun experience. And so, since what is arguably the peak of caster supremacy in the history of Dungeons & Dragons, which is 3rd edition and 3.5, there have been various efforts to tone down the power of casters. D&D 4th edition pretty much solved this problem, but it came under criticism because many felt that martial classes and caster classes, that their mechanics were too similar. Now, 5th edition has done its own things compared to 3rd edition that has reined in the power of casters, but it's pretty much there's pretty much a consensus that casters are more powerful than martial characters once you get to the mid and higher levels. Pathfinder 2nd edition comes onto the scene and takes another stab at this problem, while trying to also maintain the uniqueness and identity of the classes. And in this video, we will first go over some of the core design decisions to meet this goal on the behalf of Paizo. Second, we'll go over the Marshals vs. Casters event that we held that was very successful and look closely at what that showed. And then lastly, we'll make some takeaways about whether casters have been over-nerfed, as this video is titled, in comparison to Marshals, and what we've learned. Some core decisions were made in Pathfinder 2e's design. First, they took 5e's idea of not letting a caster's level automatically empower spells. To make a given spell like Fireball or Magic Missile more powerful, one has to use a more powerful resource, namely a higher level spell slot. Another decision was not to adopt D&D 5e's flexible spellcasting. In Pathfinder 2e, prepared casters, like wizards, don't have the luxury of casting a prepared spell more than once per day, and even spontaneous casters, like sorcerers, are not given the freedom to use their low-level spells with any of their spell slots, regardless of what level that spell slot is. This means that after a spellcaster in Pathfinder 2e casts a spell, they are increasingly limiting their choices for spellcasting later in the day. Another key design choice was to demarcate what spell levels unlock various abilities. Flight, for example, has moved up to 4th level. Teleport has moved up to 6th level. Haste is available as a 3rd level spell, but it only affects one person, and to make it affect several people, it has to be cast as a 7th level spell. There's also been some key changes made to individual spells to make them less impactful. Another key decision was the weakening of save or suck effects. 5e had already made some progress in this front. Spells like Flesh to Stone and others usually require the victim to make multiple saving throws and fail them in order for the very worst effect to happen. But there are still offenders like Polymorph and so forth. Pathfinder 2e puts the incapacitation trait on some spells, walling off the very worst effect of it behind a critical failure. So one could fail against, say, Feeble Mind, but not get the very worst effect, which is behind critical failure, which is rolling 10 or lower than the caster's DC. And what Pathfinder does, in addition, is give some spells the incapacitation trait, so that if Feeble Mind, which is a 6th level spell, is used against a creature that is level 13 or higher, the creature gets to count their saving throw as 1 degree of success higher. So it becomes impossible for that creature to get the very worst effect, and they pretty much have to roll a natural 1 on a 20-sided die to get even the failure effect. Another decision was to make many spells not usable within combat. Teleport, for example, requires an extended period of time, and other spells are turned into rituals that can take possibly a day or many days to cast. And in addition, you don't have to be a caster to use the ritual, which is a mechanic borrowed from 4e. The last key decision is that within the 3-action economy, whereas marshals can make an attack using 1 action, the casters, for the vast majority of their spells, need to use 2 actions or more to cast. This means that marshals can make pretty much more than 1 attack per turn, while casters usually are limited to 1. These changes combined have made a lot of people coming from other editions feel dissatisfied going in, playing a caster, if they've played a caster in another edition. And it's undeniable that that perception is partly because in other systems, casters are more powerful than the other classes, but also there's an opinion that casters are in fact weaker than marshals. So for fun, on my channel, I hosted 2 events in which martial characters were pitted against caster characters, and I'll be talking about the second event. So for this event, we did have a team versus team arena for the 2 teams to clash directly with each other, but it was pretty obvious that that would create a problem, and that the casters would walk in with all of their spell slots, and perhaps it wouldn't be really representative of what they could contribute to a party over the course of a normal adventuring day. So we had 3 rooms. Each team had 3 identical rooms that they would go through first before encountering each other in the PvP arena. And theoretically, the casters would be forced to use some of their daily resources before that last room. Now, if you want to know who won the event, I will say that now. And spoiler if you don't want to hear this, but the casters won the event. And I think what was interesting was not who won, but more looking closely at what happened during the event, what did we learn? And I would say the casters won, not because they're more powerful. So we'll take a look. So the first room was a series of jumping platforms that the parties had to deal with in order to go after a camped archer, while there was an elemental flying about the room that wanted to push them off those platforms. And what was immediately apparent was that each team, depending on whether they were marshals or casters, was trying to had come up with a strategy when building their characters to compensate for their weaknesses and where they lacked. So, for example, the casters normally are squishy, and so they came up with a plan to boost their armor class, their defense, as high as possible, using alchemical items, a tower shield, crouching behind it, and using the bard's buffs as well, and literally tanking like a World War I tank across the floor of the room. And meanwhile, the fighters wanted to get their melee advantage to happen right away, and so they used their athletics to jump those platforms, and to the extent that they took wounds, they had built their characters to be able to use their skills to heal quickly. At one point, the Mephit used Gust of Wind to blow out the torch that the marshals were holding. This is going to cast Gust of Wind right here. Which was a nice little reminder that a light spell has its advantages over mundane light. The marshals lost some time and had to relight a torch. And once they were able to get over that problem and get to the archer, it was game over. It just took 5 rounds to get here.
Whoa! And there's the crit.
Meanwhile, the casters spent many more rounds slowly crossing the room, and the archer ran out of arrows. This is be the one historic time the number of amount of ammo you have matters.
Matters?
Yeah, just completely unprecedented in a D&D game, and then went after them, where the casters promptly peppered it with ranged magic spells and killed it. Next was the hallway to room 2. We put things between the rooms as well, which was haunted by unquiet spirits that had arms reaching out of the walls trying to grab the party and do damage to them as well. And we saw the 2 teams use different approaches, the casters using knowledge checks and using their skills to eliminate the haunt, while the marshals used brute force. He's going to self-flagellate.
Then he's just going to try and hit it with his long stick.
Okay, that's another way to deal with scary things. The next room was the notorious double TPK, in which a moderate encounter killed both parties. A moderate encounter under the system's math, if it's a solo creature, is a creature that is 2 levels above the party. Each party was level 4, and each party was facing a level 6 white dragon with frost breath in a wintry environment, starting on a frozen lake, where if you're not in the frozen lake, you're dealing with a snowpack. So the environment completely was to the dragon's advantage, which probably would have upgraded it to severe. Now the marshals came closer to actually defeating the dragon, but when they crowded around it, this dragon had this ability to basically stomp the ground and knock them prone, and meanwhile they're on ice, and there were acrobatics checks that they had to make in order to stand back up and reposition themselves. It was not a good time. Meanwhile, the casters tried to get off the ice as quickly as possible also, and they created a magical bridge to get over to the snowpack. However, they did not all get there quickly enough, and they got separated, and the distance that was created among party members made it impossible for them to use their healing spells for each other. Also, there was some comically bad luck, I must say, for the casters. By this point, they had gotten a lot of natural ones over the previous couple of hours, and there was a key moment where one of the healers had to just simply jump off the ice to get onto the magical bridge.
Leap of faith time.
All right.
Chuffy. Don't you do it.
Next was room 3, in which they encountered a clockwork soldier hiding in an area of magical darkness that was surrounded by balconies that had clockwork archers. The casters had a decided advantage because they were able to target their weakness to electricity. They did take some damage from the archers. They're not able to use their defensive mutagen in every room because it was a consumable resource that they had to ration for the last room. The casters also used their ranged advantage to attack that soldier from a distance, and were able to defeat it relatively quickly. So its attack of opportunity and that ability's ability to make a caster not want to cast their spell didn't really figure into this battle. Meanwhile, the martial team sent a couple of their characters using their athletics to climb up to the balcony and start taking on the archers. They were able to withstand a knockout by the soldier thanks to their mundane in-combat healing. The hallway to the last room was the trapped chest, and here no one had really prepared for it. They didn't have thieves' tools or spare picks for when their thieves' tools broke. So only the casters were able to get in after they used their crafting skill to repair their broken thieves' tools, and they got a scroll of Summon Fae for the last battle. So by the time it got to the PvP room, room 4, the casters had not used a huge amount of their resources, perhaps 20-25%. So they were pretty, after having done a lot of planning, able to withstand those rooms and conserve those resources for the last battle. What happened early in the battle was that the casters cast Wind Wall and was able to congregate inside the wind wall that they had shaped in a near complete circle, which effectively nullified ranged attacks. They were still able to affect the battle from within the wall using summons and other abilities. Also through clever planning, they got their fish character using an ancestry feat to be able to camp in the river that was pretty much a moving turret throughout the battle, while making attacks from range. The Marshal's plan was a sound one. It was basically to try to close the distance as quickly as possible with the casters and get into an advantageous position, namely melee. However, the casters were able to use their Drakeheart mutagen, their Bard's songs, to raise their armor class above to what a martial character normally would get at this level. And so, even though some of the marshals were able to close in and whack at the casters, they were not able to get those key critical hits, which, because of the caster's high AC, would have required a natural 20, pretty much. So it was one short of a critical success. All right.
What you're saying is every +1 matters.
Right. The battle was pretty well matched, but what eventually was the immediate cause of the marshals conceding was they had a knockout or two, and they had run out of their in-combat healing so that they couldn't get them back up. Now, there was some lively discussion on Reddit about this event and some speculation about what the marshals could have done instead, including doing the very popular tactic on the Reddit of getting gnome flick maces and chaining attacks of opportunity. And first, I think it's important to understand that there was some artificiality to this event. This was not a typical adventuring scenario. The players built their characters to face each other, and they also had to build their characters blindly, not knowing what the other side was building. The moderators revealed all of the character builds simultaneously to all the players, so they were not able to react to what they saw the other side having. Otherwise, we would have a perpetual cycle of people adjusting to each other. Although the casters could not change the spells they prepared after this reveal, it still didn't change the fact that the marshals had to account for a lot of different plans the casters could have possibly used because of just the sheer variety of options that they had with the full spell list. As Swing Ripper of Team Marshals put it, when they were planning their characters, they anticipated 3 possible strategies on the part of the casters, which he called hypermobility, hyperburst, and setup spam. Because of the sheer number of options casters have, they had the initiative to shape the battlefield, and the marshals were forced to generalize and not know which plan the casters are going to lean into before seeing the casters' characters. So they had to make a versatile composition that could account for any of those contingencies. And what eventually happened was a 4th possibility, he called it, in which they made themselves versions of marshals that had high defenses and made themselves pretty much hard to confront. Another pretty apparent thing is that the marshals were pretty much limited to either rushing with melee or using ranged attacks, and even in both cases they'd be targeting the armor class of the mages, whereas the casters were able to target either the armor class or one of the 3 different saving throws of the martial characters. So that gave the casters more ability to hyper-focus on using their items budget and abilities to boost the only real defense they needed against the marshals. So what this means is that we didn't find out which team was better. We found in adventuring, we found out which team was better for this event. And of course, as everyone over the course of the event agreed with, this is a stupid debate. A party wants to have both marshals and casters on it to do its best in an adventure. Okay, so what are the takeaways? Well, first is the fact that it really dramatized how in Pathfinder 2e, you need to just abandon the idea that comes from other editions that what you're doing is optimizing your character. Yes, you want to build your character and make it as effective as possible, but what you're doing is really optimizing the party. And if you are choosing your character's abilities, how they can work in tandem with other members of the party's abilities is really what you're looking for. Because among your choices in Pathfinder 2e, you're not going to find simple math enhancers that give you, say, a +1 to attack or a +5 to damage. You're not going to find those. You're going to find various different actions that you can use using your limited 3 actions that may possibly set up things for someone else, such as, obviously, a fighter feat that would hit an enemy but also trip them to the ground would allow a rogue to then come up and stab that person on the ground because that person on the ground is now flat-footed, or the rogue has the equivalent of advantage from 5e against that creature. You will be flat-footed to me. Similarly, you're not going to find spells like Fireball that wins an encounter, or a Saber Suck spell like Polymorph. Instead, the casters need to not one-shot enemies in this system, but what they can do is target weaknesses against certain energy types, or buff their allies, or debuff enemies, especially debuff a boss creature that is going to have higher combat stats than the marshals. In order to enable the marshals to get those critical hits, the marshals need the casters, and the casters need the help of the marshals. And what we saw is that in the war between the casters and the marshals, the winner was the dragon. And the dragon, if you look at its stat block, it has breath weapon. It has the ability to engage in melee. The dragon we had also had spell casting. It also had high mobility. It had strong defenses, and basically it was a party, a balanced party in one creature. The casters did not have a scary marshal in the dragon's face to draw attention away from them so that they could play support roles and attack using their ranged spells and heal and buff their party members from a distance, whereas the fighters were soundly countered when they surrounded the dragon and the dragon knocked them all prone with its ability. And then the dragon had attack of opportunity when they tried to stand up. And they had relatively few ranged options, and also didn't have many healing resources to bring back down party members. The dragon didn't have any weak defenses, and casters were too busy trying to get out of the ice and being unconscious to use their fire spells. Both teams after the TPKs were pretty much in agreement that if the casters had one marshal on their party, and if the marshals had one caster on their party, that they likely would have won. So this feeds into 2 points really. One, that a balanced party is a better party. You need both marshals and casters in the system. And the second thing that becomes apparent is that versatility is really important in Pathfinder 2e. Not having a single routine that you do every turn, but having the ability to adapt to a variety of challenges that are going to come up in a variety of combats and situations outside of combat. While the casters did win the event, partly because of the initiative issue that I described earlier about their ability to set the terms of the battle, there really should be credit where it's due to the players of the casters team who put a lot of work into researching their options and coming up with a very, very solid strategy for all of the rooms, actually. But it also highlighted that it does take some more thought and planning to be a caster. They had to deal with more resource management, not only of their consumable items, but of course their spell slots and spells. There is more thinking involved usually when you are a caster. Another important thing was that the casters before the event ran a simulation of the last room. Both teams had access to each other's character sheets after a certain point, and the marshals won those simulations, but didn't win in the actual battle. So I think Paizo largely succeeded in their design goals of creating a balance between marshals and casters, while also preserving their respective identities. So did Pathfinder over-nerf casters? I would say no. I think that we're in a good place right now, I would say, between the two types of classes. And it really is a testament to a lot of the hard work that Paizo put into designing this edition. They had a massive playtest in which they had the players go through the same set of adventures and send in not only open form responses, but also quantitative data. And they were able to use that to fine-tune and also stress test the system. And all of that hard work, the result really shows.
Who said magic's weak? Arguments are lame, this is a team game, better I became. Since with magic you're flat-footed to me.
Okay, so this has been The Rules Lawyer. I am a lawyer who also teaches tabletop role-playing games, including D&D and Pathfinder, to kids and teens. And definitely like and subscribe if you've liked what you've seen. And also join us on our Discord. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.